All right, great, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to this webinar on women's empowerment in agri-food systems. And this webinar will draw on findings from two women's empowerment programs.
Others. How to communicate this better.
Okay, thank you for that. So as I said, this webinar will draw from two projects, the Cultivate Africa's Future CultiAF project that focused on crop and fisheries systems in 7 East African countries and funded by IDRC and ACIAR, and also another project on livestock vaccine innovation fund focused on animal vaccines in 6 countries and funded in partnership with IDRC, Bill and Melinda Gates, and the Global Affairs Canada. So in this webinar, before we start, we just want to warm the room a bit and do some quick Menti. Just gonna put my screen in full presentation mode. And do let me know if it goes to the next slide. Seems it. Okay. So quick Menti, we just want to know who's in the room. If you can go to menti.com and enter the code that you see on the screen. I don't know whether the code is visible to everyone, but if you can go to menti.com and enter the code 79108846. And so we want to know, are you a development practitioner? Are you a researcher? Are you a donor? Or others? Okay, I can see, I think 13 people on the Menti.
I think we have some technical issues with the Menti, Nathan, and people are not able to click. So maybe for the time being, you can just pop in the chat which one you are.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, let's post in the chat. Are you a development practitioner, a researcher, a donor, or others? Okay, let me just look at the chat quickly. Okay, I see researchers, donor, researcher. Okay, so many researchers in the room, which is good. Yeah, more researchers, more researchers. Let's see, do we have any practitioners, maybe? Okay, and moving on to the next one. So in 1 to 3 words, could you please, in 1 to 3 words, say what you associate empowerment with? In 1 to 3 words, you associate empowerment with da-da-da-da. 1 to 3 words. I don't know why the Menti is not working. Okay, now it seems Menti is working finally. Agency, power, progress, choice. Yeah, you have up to 3 words. And I also see the chat. I see you, Edward, saying agency, representation, knowledge, stability, progress. Let me pick one more. Let's see if I can get one more. We have support. Okay, let's keep that coming, but we'll quickly move on to the next bit of this webinar. Thanks again for joining, and I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Nathan Rono, and I'll be taking you through this webinar. I'm part of the communications and outreach team at the CJR Gender Equality and Inclusion Accelerator. Quickly to show you the agenda for today, we'll have some quick opening remarks from Nicoline Dehan and Renaud Depline. We'll have a presentation. Remember the findings from the 2 projects from Hazel Malapit, Alessandra Galia, and Els Lecutera. And then we'll have quick breakout sessions to sort of process what we hear from the presentation. And after that, we'll have a quick panel discussion with Agnes Loriba, Sandra Gagnon, and Barbara Kramer. I hope I said your name right, Sandra, but we'll practice that in the panel discussion. And of course, that will bring us to the close of the webinar. So to kick us off with the opening remarks, we want to hear from Renaud Depline. And Renaud is a senior program specialist at International Development Research Center, IDRC. And Renaud is a skilled researcher whose work cuts across critical development issues such as environment management, food security, and human health, with over 20 years of fieldwork experience and project management. So good morning, Renaud, and please welcome to give your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. And I don't want to take too much time before getting to the meat or the substance of the meeting. Just a quick reminder for those who don't know IDRC that the International Development Research Center is a Canadian corporation which for over 50 years now has been supporting research on the Global South and by Global South institutions to help them address key social, economic, and environmental challenges that they face. And one of the 5 programs in IDRC is the Climate Resilient Food System Program, to which I belong, which promotes sustainable, healthy, and equitable food systems that include women, Indigenous people, and other marginalized communities in climate hotspots in low and middle income countries. It's a program that really looks at food system as a critical lever to address the complex social and planetary problem that they face, and to contribute to more sustainable and equitable societies in the Global South. Now, for over 3 decades now, IDRC has recognized the critical role that women are playing in food system, but also the specific challenge, constraint, and vulnerability that they face. And the need to address and transform structural inequalities in food system as a critical condition to the development of more inclusive, resilient, healthy, sustainable food system. And therefore, gender has been a critical condition to include in the objectives, methodology, budget of research proposal, and in the composition of research team in order for product to be considered for funding. Now, as a public funder, IDRC needs to ensure that the research it funds is actually making a difference in the life of the most vulnerable. And it always look at how we can demonstrate that impact. So it's with a lot of interest that we initiate discussion with the team from the gender platform in the CGIAR over 5 years ago on how we could actually test 2 sets of indicators, and we'll have a chance to discuss them shortly, the pro-WEAI, Women Empowerment in Agricultural Index, and the WELI, the Women Empowerment in Livestock Index, and how we could actually integrate those 2 sets of indicators and test those indicators in the 2 programs that were previously mentioned, the CultiAF, Cultivating African Future, and the Livestock Vaccine Innovation. And how through their inclusion, we could on one hand help to document how the projects were having an impact on women empowerment, but also on the other hand, to provide an opportunity to test and to refine the tool by their systematic use in a large cohort of projects. So for us, today is the presentation, discussion of the results of that project, and reflection a bit on, based on those 5 years experience, what has been the usefulness, the potential, the challenges associated to use of those tools by our research partners, and to try to reflect on how can we make the best use of tools like the Women Empowerment Index in research for development. I'm not going to say more than that. I really look forward to not only the presentation of results from that project, but really to a discussion about their usefulness and how we can use those tools to better inform women transformation and the development of more, let's say, equitable, sustainable, healthy food system. I'm going to stop here, Nicolene.
Thanks, and thanks again. Thanks. You've said basically everything I had on my thing to say, but just wanted to also highlight the fact that this was one of our first collaborations together as a gender platform, and I really appreciated it at that time for coming to us to talk about things like this and how we can actually do it better, especially since it is across the CGIAR type of project, so it was different CGIAR centers coming together, and that's where the platform really came into being. For all those who don't know, the gender platform, now called Gender Accelerator, was set up to actually work across the CGIAR and to give us more voice as gender people in the CGIAR by working together on projects such as this. Because again, as everyone knows, there are a lot of people using the WEAI and the WELI, and so how can we actually do that better and more effectively. So again, and I really appreciate all the researchers at ILRI and IFPRI who are willing to go with us along on this journey. And yeah, that's all I have to say. Renaud already said all the reasons why we did this. So, but look forward to both to the results and also to the discussion, and hope we can build more upon the outcomes of this project. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Nicoline and Renaud. And of course, I didn't finish doing the introduction for Nicoline. Nicoline is the director for the CGIAR Gender Equality and Inclusion Accelerator. We'll move on quickly to get some quick presentation from 3 researchers. And in this session, we'll hear from Hazel Malapit, who's a gender research coordinator with IFPRI. We'll also hear from Alessandra Gallier, who's a gender team lead at ILRI, and of course, Els Lecouteur, who's the science officer with the CGIAR Gender Equality and Inclusion Accelerator. Over to you.
Thank you, Nathan. So thank you. Could you put it in presentation mode? That's helpful. Thank you. So welcome. Previous slide, yeah, that one. Welcome to the presentation of this collaborative research project on women's empowerment in agri-food systems. So in this project, we synthesized and drew actionable insights from 2 project portfolios. And this collaborative research project, as Nicoline already mentioned, was conducted by a team of gender researchers from ILRI, from IFPRI, and the CGIAR Gender Accelerator. The names of the research team are also listed on this slide. And this collaborative research project was funded by International Development Research Center, IDRC. Next slide, please. So why did we do this? So the evidence on changes to women's empowerment in agriculture and livestock interventions, it is expanding, but it is still relatively limited. And assessing the effects across portfolios of projects focused on women's empowerment through agriculture and livestock interventions, they can provide us with key insights across approaches and across context, across projects. So this research project is a meta-analysis of a portfolio of 4 livestock vaccine innovation fund, LVIF, projects that used the Women's Empowerment in Livestock Index, the WELI, to measure women's empowerment. And it also includes a portfolio of 8 Cultivate Africa's Future projects, CultiAF projects, that use the project level Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index. Next slide, please. So first, those QR codes, if you follow them, you will get to the links of the published outcomes. We'll give them to you again, so don't worry. So the objectives of our meta-analysis across LVIF and CultiAF was to synthesize results and lessons on the achievements in terms of women's empowerment. Also draw and synthesize lessons on the use of the pro-WEAI and the WELI tools. And then also provide recommendations to enhance women's empowerment, WELI and WEAI, across future portfolio programs. And now I give the floor to the next one. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Els. I hope you can hear and see me. So I will introduce briefly the LVIF portfolio projects. So LVIF is the Livestock Vaccine Innovation Fund. It included 4 projects that were focused on small ruminants and poultry in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Nepal, Senegal, and Ghana. The projects were GIVE, SheVax, UF Advancing, and Women Rear. All the projects that were involved in LVIF used the Women's Empowerment in Livestock Index, both the qualitative and quantitative component of the project and of the tool, and they also used other qualitative methods so that they would all test effective approaches to make animal vaccine system more gender responsive, with the goal of supporting women's empowerment as well. What is interesting in all the LVIF projects that they all had as a goal the creation of a gender responsive vaccine system, and all aimed to support women's empowerment, but through different approaches. LVIF was supported by the IDRC, the Gates Foundation, and moving on to CultiAF. Hazel.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. And so in the Cultivate Africa's Future portfolio in CultiAF, so we have 8 projects that focused on crop and fishery systems in 7 East and Southern African countries. So this include Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And so as in the LVIF, we refer to these projects by their acronyms and short names. And so the full project names are, of course, in the paper. So we have Acre Africa Calro, Fasimo, Fisheries, INSFeed, IPM Mango, and Nutrifish, pre-cooked beans, and sorghum. And all the projects used pro-WEAI quantitative tools to measure project impact on women's empowerment and gender equality. Some also used qualitative tools. And then in terms of their empowerment strategies, all of the projects did some training to build knowledge and skills. A majority provided goods and services, and some aimed to change norms through gender champions and training content. Next slide, please. So the pro-WEAI and the WELI measure 3 types of agency. Power within, or intrinsic agency, is that feeling of power within oneself. We have power to, or instrumental agency, which is the power to do things, the power to make decisions. We have power with, or collective agency, which is the power we have when working with others. And so here you see the list of the indicators in the WELI, which includes the required pro-WEAI indicators, the optional pro-WEAI indicators, as well as the highlighted indicators here in green, which have some additional components that are relevant to livestock projects in the WELI. Both the pro-WEAI and the WELI use the same underlying Alcar-Foster methodology for constructing the index, as in all the other WEAI versions. And so basically, we ask the same set of survey questions to women and men respondents. Depending on their responses, we code them as either adequate or inadequate in each indicator. We then take the weighted average of these indicators, and that becomes the individual's empowerment score. And so if their score is 75% or higher in the weighted indicators, we consider them empowered, and disempowered otherwise. So over to Alessandra for the next slide.
Yes, thank you. Just a little more of a diving onto the WELI tools. As Hazel has just said, the pro-WEAI and WELI tools are aligned. Just that the WELI really focuses mostly on livestock. So WELI contains all the 10 pro-WEAI indicators, but it really adds and zooms in on livestock. We also have 3 additional indicators, inputs into household decision, again with the livestock focus, but also the respect among household members and membership in influential groups. So both WELI and WEAI are both quantitative and qualitative, and as mentioned already, the results are comparable across the tools. And we are emphasizing this because, of course, it's at the basis of the ability for us to undertake this meta-analysis. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So I wanted to give you an idea about what was the general approach that we adopted when doing this meta-analysis across all LVIF and CultiAF portfolio projects. So we have one overall research question. So we did, it was already clarified, but we had 2 types of 2 goals. One was really to assess what was the impact of empowerment, on women's empowerment across the CultiAF and LVIF projects. And the other was more to assess the performance of the WELI and WEAI tools. So what I'm going to talk about is about the impact of women's empowerment. So the methodology that we adopted to assess the impact of the project on women's empowerment was focused on answering the research question, what did agriculture and livestock development projects involved in the CultiAF and LVIF achieve in terms of women's empowerment? So as we said, the CultiAF projects adopted the pro-WEAI, and the LVIF projects adopted the WELI. WELI and pro-WEAI are comparable. Therefore, we could clearly have a set of comparable results of women's empowerment. What is important here is that we did not analyze the raw data from the various projects. What we did the team of people involved in writing this work, in doing this work and writing the papers, we developed, we supported the teams to adopt the tools, and we also developed an Excel sheet where we were asking questions that the projects would provide. And the questions were, of course, helping us to answer the main research question that we had. And so what the projects provided, they provided analyzed data, already analyzed data at both baseline and end line. So what we did then, we first worked at portfolio level. So the LVIF team, which was myself and other people in my team as well, and then Hazel's team, we actually looked at the LVIF and CultiAF separately for both quantitative and qualitative. We mapped the results that were provided by the different projects, what I said in the previous point, the analyzed data, and then we mapped them to the research questions. We compared their baseline and their end line, and we looked for patterns. And then in terms of quantitative, we also assessed the strength of the impact design. And once we came up with patterns for CultiAF and LVIF, then we compared also the results across the two portfolios to also see what were the patterns and what were the outliers. And some of the results are about to come. Please, next slide. So again, what were the key quantitative results that we saw in terms of women's empowerment? Well, the results show mostly null findings. And what was very clear to us was that the projects that intentionally supported women's empowerment and the ones that had a proper level of investment, they were quite successful in terms of supporting women's empowerment. And the most promising results are for the projects that exactly have specific strategies that intentionally influence women's empowerment, that intentionally aimed to transform gender norms, and that also strengthened organizations. It's interesting that some of the projects reported positive impacts on both women's and men's empowerment, which is a good thing. However, some of them reported negative impacts on gender parity. And this means that while both women and men were being empowered by the project, men were being more empowered than the women. So again, this is something very important to look at. And as you see, we don't really have very conclusive results. And this is because we really had an issue with the fact that many of the designs for the impact assessment were not scientific. There was no standard error provided, and also it was not very easy to share the data. And you will see these considerations informing also the next slide. Next slide, please. And these are the results from the qualitative findings. It was interesting to explore qualitatively with the project participants what were the indicators of empowerment that they considered really important. Women and men both mentioned mobility. Mobility was very important for them as an indicator of empowerment, off-farm employment, also having leadership position and having reputable professions, and resource ownership. There was a strong emphasis on resource ownership, even though a difference there. Women talked about empowerment as their ability to manage resources independently, while men mostly mentioned their ability to utilize resources to support family members. Also, in terms of when we asked them, okay, what is the best way, what is the best means to achieve empowerment? Both women and men mentioned groups, but it was very important that women's empowerment was associated to men's support. And this really calls for gender transformative approaches. It was very clear that for most of the respondents, the different projects talked to, women's empowerment was needed, the support of the men to become real. And finally, another important element that we noticed is that while we explored what were the key indicators of women's empowerment at baseline, and we asked the same question at endline, while the indicators did not change between baseline and endline, the way people talked about them changed. So at baseline, the indicators were aspirational. They were talking about it would be good to have a group to be able to, while at endline, they really spoke about the same indicators as a lived experience. They were really saying we were able to leverage women's groups to then gain a voice and so on. So, really a demonstration of lived experiences of empowerment. Next slide, please. So overall, what we have learned in terms of changes in women's empowerment, both quantitatively and qualitatively, ownership of assets, income, social status, which were referred mostly to the profession, and mobility were strongly associated with women's empowerment. And then group membership was necessary for both the empowerment of women and men, while the empowerment of women was necessary for women's support, women's empowerment. We also learned that intentional approaches, dedicated resources, and transformative approaches are needed for women's empowerment. We also learned that combining quantitative and qualitative results was very important to understand how the projects had impacted change and also add nuances. We also learned that combining the goals of research and development is complex. And this came up when we needed to implement, the projects needed to implement scientific designs to be able to assess impacts. And that was sometimes not in line with the development priorities of our development partners that implement the interventions. And finally, also what we learned is that it's important to have dedicated financial resources to do a systematic impact assessments, but also the meta-analysis like the one that we did. It was wonderful that IDRC supported us because this is so much work to do meta-analysis that dedicated financial resources are important to then also do synthesis work. And I think there is one more slide. Finally, there was a big learning for us. So it was amazing for us to see the potential of meta-analysis across portfolio projects. It's really incredible how much you can learn when you have a big number of projects that are all aiming to support women's empowerment in crops or livestock, and they adopt different approaches, and they utilize the same metrics, the same tools. However, for successful meta-analysis, we have recommendations. We need to make sure that we produce scientifically sound data, so the design needs to be scientific. It is also interesting that we need to it is important that the project produce the right detail for the research questions. What happens is that the projects may have their own research questions, which are maybe not the same as the research questions of the meta-analysis. So when then asking the project to share the data, it's important that the data actually responds also to the meta-analysis research questions. And finally, there are issues with sharing detailed data. Of course, all these projects had some component of research and everybody was very interested in publishing. And then sharing data in research is unfortunately not always easy because publishing in one place may prevent from publishing in other places. So again, there needs to be a mechanism in place so that everybody is comfortable sharing their results. Another interesting point is that meta-analysis is really about looking at common denominators. And once you do that across a number of LVIF projects and the CultiAF project, and then you do it across, again, CultiAF and LVIF, there is a high level of generalization that may actually result in the loss of the nuances and the depths that are very important when you focus on a specific project. So overall, this led us to conclude that it's important to continue having portfolio projects that adopt similar tools to be able to compare the analysis, but it is also important to discuss with all the projects very early in their life, what are the expectations, so that the collaboration can be enhanced and the budgets can be developed to reflect, the agreements about having a common design, having a common tool. Hazel, on to you, I believe.
Great, thank you. So that's actually a perfect segue to the second paper, which asks a different research question. So what we want to know is, what lessons can we draw from the use of these harmonized tools, the pro-WEAI and the WELI tools in this portfolio? Now, how did we do that? So in terms of data sources, we draw from 4 sources. The templates that were already described by Alessandra, the templates filled in by the project teams. We use direct observations by our co-authors team on the tool implementation. We also used our co-authors from ILRI's own use of the WELI through the Women Rear project, which was included in the portfolio. And the assessment of the results of the tools. And so we looked at 4 key issues regarding how well the tools can, 1, capture transformative change, 2, elicit information on sensitive questions. 3, how well does it align with project objectives or the relevance of the modules? And 4 is the length of the tool. Is it reasonable given the conditions encountered by projects in the field? And so now within these 4 issues, we identified 3 types of challenges. We call them topic challenges, which pertain to the subject matter of the tool itself, what the tool is aiming to cover. We have operational challenges. So these involve practical difficulties in implementing the tool, such as local or institutional context or logistical constraints. And then we have research challenges, which arise from conducting the research, regardless of the tool used. And then, of course, these challenges do overlap and are very interconnected. And so we also looked at for some elements that contributed to the successful use of the tools. For the meta-analysis, so we first analyzed the LVIF and CultiAF separately, and then we reflected on commonalities and differences between them, and then identified our recommendations. Next slide, please. And so what did we find? So on the context-specific relevance, so projects reported, for example, that WELI is useful in capturing empowerment, but has some shortcomings in capturing the full complexity of empowerment in the culturally diverse and economically disadvantaged settings that the projects work in. As for module alignment, so no, previous slide, please. We're still there. Yes, thank you. So for module alignment, some WELI modules were misaligned with the objectives for the projects, which prompted the addition of some custom modules. So for example, on animal vaccines and gender norms, which then increased tool length. So there are, you solve one issue, that means that adds to other kind of constraints. From the CultiAF side, in the INSFID project reported that enumerators had difficulty explaining the nuanced concepts in the self-efficacy module, for example. Perhaps not surprisingly, it was the projects with rigorous enumerator training programs, which were the most successful in administering such complex questions. And then we found that the local relevance of the tool was enhanced through the use of local enumerators, translating survey into local language, matching the gender of the enumerators and the respondent, and engaging local leaders. So this is quite consistent with what we already know about best practices for implementing the WEAI family of tools. So these findings are supporting this guidance. Next slide. Okay. On the data quality and survey fatigue, so this is a big concern. Data quality was, of course, affected by tool length for both pro-WEAI and the WELI, as well as the sensitivity of questions. This also affects data quality. We found that data quality is improved with robust training and digitization of the tools. The fisheries project reported that they equipped the research assistants with methods to keep respondents engaged throughout this process, so this was helpful for them. In the ACIAR Africa CalRO project, they reported that female respondents had difficulty approaching male respondents to inform them about the study out of fear or respect, and so they solved this by designating male gender champions to inform men about the study. On the operational and logistical challenges, so this included finding the primary man and primary women respondent at the house, especially during planting season. So for example, one of the project's enumerators assumed that the spouse is always a woman or the wife, whereas in the WELI, the recommendation is that the index woman is the primary respondent, and then the main man is the secondary respondent. And so this assumption was creating confusion on who to target for the interview, mistakes on the reported gender of the respondents, and so on. In the ACIAR Africa CalRO project, they solved the issue of high respondent attrition by increasing the incentive given to participants. So there's quite a range of kind of solutions that projects found on the ground. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we improve the use of harmonized tools like pro-WEAI and WELI across the portfolio? So So here are our recommendations. So first, we need to strengthen capacity and training to ensure data quality. So this means prioritizing capacity in local languages, gender sensitivity, quantitative and qualitative data collection skills, and training on the nuance and sensitive modules. Second, and I think we cannot emphasize this enough, start early. So this needs, you need to build this into the plans from the earliest stages as possible with the research teams and the development partners. Now, in our study, for example, all the projects in the portfolio implemented tools at baseline, and only some did it at endline. So it's important to agree on the tool to be used when shaping budgets and work plans. Third, intentional programming, and we already heard this from the first set of results Alessandra shared, intentional programming. So projects best support women's empowerment when they have explicit strategies to transform empowerment and gender norms. So you need to design intentionally for the impact you want. Fourth, capture local conceptualizations of empowerment. So projects need to build their interventions and interpret their survey data in line with women's empowerment as locally understood and desired. And then lastly, consider the optimal tool length. So we understand and fully acknowledge that respondent fatigue is real and is nearly universal. So projects where empowerment is not the primary goal should consider collecting fewer of the pro-WEAI or WELI indicators and modules as relevant with their theory of change. And that sort of thinking through about what tools matter for the program is what should inform kind of the conceptualization from the beginning. Over to Els now for the last section. Thanks.
Thank you. So maybe as a recap, so what would be now an ideal approach based on our findings and recommendations? I think the first one, if you want to achieve women's empowerment, be intentional and maybe have a gender transformative approach in your agricultural livestock project. If there's an interest also to know what strategy is most effective to increase women's empowerment or to understand some of the mechanisms, is it through norms, is it through resources, is it through strategies as a community or at the household level, then your implementation of your intervention and your research design need to cater for that. So for instance, you could do it in this way. Apart from a livestock-focused intervention, you could have one treatment group where you have household-level strategies, like promoting more gender-equal inter-household decision-making power or labor division are promoted. You could have another treatment arm, a green one here, where you have community-level strategies that are implemented and tested. Strategies that aim to sort of balance the power relations between value chain actors or strengthen collective action in women's groups. And in yet another treatment arm, you could actually implement and test the combined household and community strategies. Next slide, please. Second, in an ideal approach, as my colleagues mentioned previously, one would design the projects, the interventions, the research design for assessing the effects of those interventions on women's empowerment and the meta-analysis of these project effects simultaneously at the start. And this is important because to enable an assessment of the project effects, your interventions need to be implemented in treatment groups and the control group needs to be established. To enable a meta-analysis, you need data that's comparable across projects, so using similar research designs and data collection tools like the WELI or the WEAI. Then also from the start, it's important that there's a provision of adequate resources. And those are both financial and human resources for all of the package, the interventions, research activities, and the meta-analysis. And what we think could be an efficient and cost-efficient way could be to centralize some of the things, like data collection on outcome variables that are common across projects, such as women's empowerment, and to centralize the meta-analysis. And with this, we end the presentation of our findings and recommendations, and I hand it over back to Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you, Els, Hazel, and Alessandra. A round of applause to you. And we'll quickly move on to the next bit. I know that there might be lots of questions in the chat. I can't see the chat for now, but we have some time in the next section to process what we've had from the presentations. And so in like a minute or under a minute, we'll all break out into some breakout rooms that have been randomly pre-assigned. So in your breakout room, you'll find a facilitator, and the different facilitators for the different breakout rooms will include Hazel, Malapit, Alessandra Gallier, Nathaniel Ferguson, Immaculate Mondi, Els Lekutere, and Caroline Mushiri. So you'll find yourself in one of these groups. In your groups, you may nominate one of your members to be a note taker. I think in the chat right about now, Jessica has posted a link that will lead you to the Google slide where you'll take your notes. So in your group, you may nominate someone to take your notes. And remember that we will also sort of report back after the breakout sessions. And so please do take notes and do participate in the group discussions. So what questions are we discussing in this breakout rooms? You'll also see, I think, in the first or second slide of the Google slides that these questions have been copy pasted there. How would I apply this learning to my work of future projects to improve interventions or assessments of effect of women empowerment across portfolio? So those are the two discussion questions. And I don't know if Jessica is ready to take us to breakout rooms.
Yeah, I am ready. Okay,
and so
great.
We'll have between 20 to 25 minutes, given that we are some 5 minutes behind time. So all the best in the breakout rooms, and see you back in 20 minutes.
We've just been teleported back.
From one world to another. Welcome to this world of things.
Like magic.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is, traveled safely to the breakout rooms, and they've traveled back safely to the plenary room. It's good to see you back, and good to see some activity also in your breakout rooms. We'll move on swiftly and quickly. In the chat, I'm going to ask you a question, right? I want us to play a quick game called Chat With. I'm going to ask you a question, but here's the trick. I want you to type your answer to the question in the chat box, but don't press enter. We will all press enter at the same time. So here's my question. My question to you is, are you ready for the question? Question disappeared. Okay, there we go. My question is, what was your key takeaway from the breakout discussion? What was your key takeaway from the breakout discussion? Please remember the rules of the game. Just type your answer, but don't press enter, right? You wait for my go. And then we'll see who's winning this Olympic race for... So what was your key takeaway from your breakout discussion? Thank you, Jessica, for posting that on the chat. can hear some moving keyboard, so that means very bright answers coming. Okay, are you ready? Okay, we'll use the keyboard as the sign for us to be ready. Okay, are we ready? Let's post our answers in 3, 2, 1, and go. Let's see the answers on the chat. Ooh, that was fun. Okay. That was fun. Okay, I see so many answers coming in. I think I'll start from the bottom of the list. Sandra says being intentional. I'll skip a few and come back up to Agnes, who says intentional design is important for women's empowerment. Let me again skip a few. Let me skip a few. Bruno says the tool has great capacity and should be integrated from start, but still requires flexibility to respond to different realities, capacities, and/or priorities. Wow, good response. Jessica says, while the tools offer tons of potential, there are still many questions around how to successfully apply these evaluation tools in measuring empowerment. For example, how when they are developed and deployed. Thank you, Jessica, for that feedback. I'll skip a few. Let me see what Immaculate says. Planning for research, design, and capacity building within portfolio is key. And seeing as we probably have 30 seconds, I don't know whether one of the facilitators would want to react to some of the things that are coming out of this. Should I pick at random? One of the facilitators? I can see your names here. And they all turned their cameras off and disappeared somewhere. Okay.
I can say something, Nathan. Else here.
Thank you. That's else, yeah.
Yeah. So what came out as main point in our group was so what is the broader goal here is actually supporting empowerment, but also understanding what works, and then understanding the nuance and also the relational parts to it. And then we also asked the question, how does it resonate with feminist principles, so that that we have more involvement and co-ownership of not only supporting empowerment, but also maybe measuring it. So stop there. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, chocolate. Thank you, Els. You earn yourself some box of chocolate when you come to Nairobi. So make sure to ask for your chocolate for responding to some of these responses that we've had. But we'll move on quickly to the next bit. Thank you so much again, everyone, for participating in the chat wave. I'll make sure I have enough chocolate for everyone in the next webinar. We'll move on quickly to a very interesting and fun panel discussion. And in this panel discussion, we have Sandra Gagnon. And again, as I said, we will practice how to say your second name in this session. So please do correct me if I'm saying it wrong, Sandra, but it's good to have you, Sandra. Sandra is a senior program specialist with the International Development Research Center and Environment Department at IDRC. So welcome, Sandra. We also have in this panel, Agnes Loriba. Agnes Loriba is a program team lead for Right to Food, Water, and Nutrition and Climate Justice at CARE International. And of course, we have our very own from CGIAR, who's Baba Kramer. Baba Kramer is the Senior Research Fellow with the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI. Jessica, I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can see the panelists spotlighted, or they are spotlighted already. Thank you. And so thank you so much for joining this quick fire panel discussion, Sandra, Agnes, and Baba. And maybe start with you, Sandra. What lessons can we learn to inform the research design for assessing women's empowerment effects across portfolio projects?
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you, Sandra.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, the synthesis that was presented and all that we could hear from the two big initiative of project is the importance of having robust project design and being very intentional from the start and allocating sufficient time and resources, since several trends that could be observed by the team couldn't be really demonstrated with significant result. We saw on the other hand that qualitative analysis proved to be very interesting, including when the conceptualization of empowerment, how people see empowerment, didn't change much from the beginning to the end. It was measured to baseline and endline study, but it was rather expressed as an aspiration from the beginning and then as a lived experience, as it was mentioned today during the presentation, but also in the report. So this is very interesting, and it points to the need for high quality qualitative analysis emerging from deep engagement with community members as an important lesson for the future programming. And it highlights the relevance of combining both qualitative and quantitative data collection. At IDRC, we often have, in addition to quantitative tools that teams will be using, qualitative measurements of the impact of intervention through local actors' perception or conceptualization of different elements or concept, such as, for example, empowerment, well-being, leadership. So these are all complex concepts. They need appreciation from within. They can't be just measured solely from surveys, as we could see. And community member perspective help reshape our understanding of this notion. And they have necessarily to be taken into account so that empowerment or other objectives and activities that we're promoting are locally relevant and in line with local perception and aspiration, as the synthesis was alluding to. Another lesson for us is the importance of mainstreaming gender integration and empowerment in the project cohort from the start. As I was mentioning, being intentional and being true to what our objective. And not this being an add-on later on in the project, so that efforts can be coordinated and integrated throughout the project cycle. In particular, this is true for pro-WEAI, given the intensity of the effort and time and resource that has to be allocated to go through the process. So if it's not planned from the start, there is lots of adjustment that needs to be done to project activities, budget, and so on. And this brings me to another important lesson for us. At IDRC, we don't fund projects that would be gender blind. And we typically have projects that would be gender sensitive through gender transformative, or those that will try to address and confront underlying cause of inequality and not just the symptoms, right? But that doesn't mean that all of our projects do really have a strong and bold focus on women empowerment. Some of them have a more modest intention in terms of gender empowerment, but they still aim at making a difference and being able to show and report on it, right? So the pro-WEAI proved to be very time and resource intensive approach. And this is not necessarily an option for all the teams. So we need tools and indexes that will offer a range of deepness in the data collection and analysis effort to ensure that we can still report and support our research teams that have less resource and capacity to conduct such a comprehensive and resource-intensive data collection and analysis. So we need different levels so that we are still able to demonstrate the impact. So I would just keep it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandra. I was about to come in, but thank you so much. Indeed, we need intentional programming. And as Alessandra said earlier, that moving the needle on women's empowerment requires intentional programming. And maybe to move on to Baba, I don't know what lessons learned can inform research design for assessing women's empowerment effects.
Yeah, so I think building a lot on what Sandra mentioned. But first of all, I want to say I'm really happy that the IDRC took this approach. I thought the initiative was very admirable, saying, okay, across 2 portfolios of projects, let's actually collect these data, because from synthesizing across multiple projects funded with sort of a similar overarching objective. You can just learn so much more than from any individual project if it's just not, you know, taken into that synthesis, if it's just looked at in isolation. So I just want to highlight that was really an admirable endeavor, and that I hope that more of these kinds of initiatives will really come up in the future again. So in terms of some of the lessons learned, both from my personal experience working on one of the CultiAF projects, as well as sort of from our panel discussion that we had just now, 3 things I want to highlight. First is co-design advanced planning and allowing for adaptive project design. Second has to do with selection of modules or how to prioritize what you measure. And the third one, I want to say a little bit more about meta-analysis and what to consider in doing so. So on the first point, on the co-design, the advanced planning, and the adaptive project design, just from own experience, I know how resource intensive this can be, not just sort of, you know, in terms of having the data collection and then also having a team synthesizing and analyzing the results, but also sort of the connection between the researchers in an individual project with the larger portfolio and with the synthesis team. Also, that involves time in preparing the data in the right format and interacting and explaining what a project might be about, and, you know, all those things. It's important to factor that in. I think this might be an easily overlooked resource need, but it also takes time on part of the project teams to be part of something, and especially be part of it in a meaningful way, and really contribute to the ultimate outcomes. So that's one thing. Through our experience in terms of the advanced planning and adaptive project design, in the beginning, there was not very specific gender intervention. But then thanks to including pro-WEAI and seeing that there was very high acceptance of intimate partner violence, especially for women, we actually designed edutainment as a gender transformative intervention, but towards the end of the project. And we would have loved for sort of this adaptive design to still be more part and parcel of the project itself, whilst, you know, the data collection for the synthesis was ongoing and so on, because I think that sort of this adaptive approach and saying, oh, this is what we're going to change in the intervention, or this is what we're going to do extra, that could also be very interesting for these types of synthesis. Then in terms of prioritizing the data that you're collecting, I know that sort of, you know, well, the length is always an issue. There is a very nice tool on the resource center that the WEAI team has built, where you can select sort of whether you should do, based on what your project is about, whether to do the abbreviated WEAI, the project WEAI, or other versions of the instrument. So it's a very nice tool to help select which modules then to subsequently include. And perhaps that could be unpacked more, for instance, depending on the nature of your intervention, on where you expect impacts to happen, which modules within a certain type of, or which types of agency to include, and which modules belong to that. I think that could be unpacked more. Also, something maybe to consider is that
maybe
people might feel.
Yes, Baba, in 30 seconds.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
by emphasizing the empowerment index as an outcome, you kind of distract from the very direct outcomes that can be influenced. And so teams might not think through very carefully anymore which specific metrics they are shifting outside of the pro-WEAI, because you kind of say, oh, our empowerment is measured this way. And then the final point has to do with meta-analysis. With these relatively smaller portfolios of projects, in terms of analysis methods, you want to consider Bayesian methods. And we've been actually in a separate initiative, been investing in data analysis software to help with applying those Bayesian methods. And I will post a link in the chat that if anybody has questions about this, we're happy to work with you. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Baba, for that. And let's move on quickly to Agnes and hear some experiences from the field, especially. For you, Agnes, are there lessons we can, are there from these lessons, how can they also inform like implementation of interventions that enhance gender equality and women's empowerment? What are some of the lessons that you can share?
Okay, yeah, thank you. From the presentation and the group session that I was in, I think one key takeaway has been the importance of intentionality and how we align this with how the WELI, in the case of the project I worked on, the LVIF portfolio, we used WELI. How we align the WELI with the outcomes, especially both development outcomes and how we measure empowerment. So it's important to ensure that we use the WELI findings to inform the design of interventions. So in our case, using the findings of WELI and guided by the Women's Empowerment Framework from CARE that supported the design of our gender transformative and gender accommodative interventions, because we're comparing GTA and GAA. We first had to look at what are the findings of the WELI baseline that we had done, and looking at the different domains of change. How do we build agency of women? How do we improve relations? And how do we transform structures? So building capacity of women to understand the benefits of vaccines, to be able to even undertake vaccine delivery, engaging communities, engaging men and boys, addressing norms, and ensuring that we address staff capacity, overcome biases, so we are able to lead the change. And also we had a private sector partner, CalTribe Technologies, working with this private sector company. We did a gender assessment of the company in the beginning to understand what are the gaps and how do we address these gaps, for instance, in the recruitment of their extension officers. So these informed the interventions that we layered for gender accommodative, gender transformative. From the implementation angle, I would also say the importance of ensuring that we have a diversified team to support different components of the project. So for instance, in our team, we had ILRI to lead the scientific research aspects of this. So ILRI led the design and execution of the WELI, CARE did the gender transformative, gender accommodative activities, and then we had a private sector partner leading vaccine delivery, introducing technology. And I think having such a diverse partnership and having all partners support in strengthening capacity across board really was very useful in terms of how we're able to conduct WELI, use the information to inform interventions, and also even routine monitoring towards endline. Regarding meta-analysis, I think for our portfolio of initiatives, it was also really useful that we had ILRI on board. Because across board, ILRI was able to support with troubleshooting, ensuring standardization of tools and processes. And I'm sure that that's contributed to the ability of this cohort of initiatives to be able to do a meta-analysis of how we contributed to women's empowerment and what the lessons have been thereof. Over.
Thank you so much, Agnes, and for sticking to the time. And so coming back to you, Baba, and maybe in like 2 minutes or under 2 minutes, any lessons we can learn, especially on the implementation of interventions that enhance gender equality and women's empowerment?
So I think the adaptive planning is very helpful there. And what was really nice in our experience is that we collected the pro-WEAI data sort of early on in the project, and then looked at, hey, where do we see the large gaps? And on the basis of that, started, as well as other gender differences that we were seeing in the data. On the basis of that, we started seeing, okay, where are the gaps, how to address this. But it's good to, start with data, both qualitative and quantitative, as your baseline, and then adapt the interventions planned on the basis of that. And so, for instance, one of the key things that stood out for us was the acceptance of domestic partner violence, that we were afraid that women might actually not dare to bring up the need to purchase insurance to their husbands. This was an insurance-related project. Another issue was that women have lower ownership of phones and of mobile money accounts, and that if you make your insurance payout, it goes into a husband's account. And so that could potentially depress the demand for insurance among women, because now they don't have control over the insurance payout because it doesn't come directly to them. So we also started thinking through, okay, how can we change the intervention and maybe potentially combine this with increasing financial inclusion and getting women to sign up for their personal mobile money accounts as well. But that takes time to really, within a context, identify what are the key barriers here. And so this adaptive project design is, I think, very important, and then finding the right indicators, to measure along with that.
Indeed, and thank you for sharing those great examples from the field also. And so you've said that we need, initially when we started, you said that we need to allocate time and we need to allocate resources. So I wonder, what are the implications for funding, especially given the lessons that we've learned? And I'm looking at you, Sandra, to kick us off on the implications for funding, given the lessons we've learned through this webinar.
Thank you. When it comes to funding research project, which is basically what we're doing, we always look for gender integration throughout the research step cycle, from the proposal, including the establishment of objective, during implementation, including the tools and methods, during monitoring, and during knowledge translation. So at proposal level, before we even decide if we would fund the project, we want to see very clearly an integrated gender everywhere. So in the objective, we will look for clear gender-specific objective on empowerment. The integration and intersectionality as well is something that we will look for. Not only repeating with a gender lens after each of the specific objectives. For instance, intention has to be very clear on whether the project is explicitly recognizing and working to address inequalities and power relation between men and women, boys and girls, including from an intersectional lens, and the extent of the expected contribution of the project to gender equality or improving women's lives. These objectives have to be reflected in the gender and in the research question and in the methodology. And we're not only, for instance, looking if the project is working with women because it occurs that they are those that are working on this specific field or thematic, but really documenting, analyzing, and addressing or trying to contribute to addressing gender inequalities. So our data collection analysis designed to capture, document, and analyze gender difference, as well as other factors of marginalization, such as sexual orientation, race, caste, ethnicity, for example. And what strategies are in place for equal, meaningful, and safe participation and leadership roles for marginalized group members, such as women. The proposal has to be clear on its intention to identify and address gender inequality with an intersectional perspective or not. And we will also look at team composition. This says a lot on the ambition of the team in terms of gender integration. So we will try to see if there are any women in leadership position of the team. We all know that having just one gender specialist in the team is not enough. Even more if this position is occupied, let's say, by the master student in a context where power imbalance and established hierarchy will mean that most often this person won't have much of a say in the course of the project, right? Team members need to understand contextual gender issues and have expertise to conduct research with the gender and intersectional lens. And if not, what is their plan to get the training and the skills to do that? we have to see, importantly, gender integration in the budget. If it's not there, it won't really happen. So we have to see where are the activities that are supposed to do what the objective says that they are set for, and what are the funding there. Are there any transportation, childcare, translation, or accommodation to make sure that everyone is able to participate, and in particular women. Also, we will want to see the monitoring and evaluation and knowledge translation and dissemination aspect. So I will stop there, just mentioning them that this is also
30
something
seconds,
that we
yeah.
look
Let me
for.
give you 30 seconds. 30
No,
seconds to wrap up.
well, now I can stop there. It was just to say that we will really look into all the process of a proposal, and also what is the place of the proposal in initiative, and make sure that what we fund has, we set the team to really achieve what they want to achieve in terms of the gender empowerment and integration that they wish for with the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandra. And of course, coming out is that we need to be intentional in all phases of the project, whether it's in the research design. So good to hear intentionality coming out stronger in all parts. And looking at you, Agnes, I don't know whether you have some lessons or any implications for funding, given the lessons that we've learned from these two projects.
Okay, yeah, so I will emphasize the importance of flexible funding, so flexibility to help teams adapt. I would just cite the example of the project I worked on. So this was a project that also sought to understand what it takes for women to deliver livestock vaccines. And on the ground, we realized that we didn't have women livestock service providers on the government side. So it was practically challenging for the team to be able to assess the effect of the interventions. Fortunately, the funding we got was flexible enough to support the project, accommodates that. So we had female livestock keepers on board, and also worked with communities to accept these livestock keepers as women because of existing local perceptions about women's ability to deliver livestock vaccines, and worked with these to understand what are the challenges and to use that to inform policy at the institutional level. My second takeaway is the importance of having diverse teams. I think I spoke about this earlier. So diverse teams that enable projects tackle both the sociological or social interventions, addressing norms, but also the technological aspects. In our case, we realized that the challenges that women face in terms of access to vaccines and benefit thereof also require some technological solutions to address same. And so having diverse sets of institutions work on addressing the challenges and the underlying issues of women's empowerment really helps in meeting the research objectives, both research and development objectives. Over.
Thank you, Agnes. And that's a nice way to end this section. I wish we had more time. Very lovely and great insights from you, Agnes Loriba, Sandra Gagnon, and Barbara Kramer. Please help me appreciate our panelists for today. I hope that in the next webinar we have more time so we can share, hear from your expertise and from your lessons in the field. But for today, thank you so much for participating in this panel. And I'm looking forward to learning more and sharing more experiences in the future webinars. Thank you so much. Another round of applause.
Thank you.
I think
Thanks, everybody.
Alessandra has something. Okay,
No.
I thought Alessandra has something. Anyway, before we wrap this up, let's do one quick round of Menti, and then I'll invite Els Lecter to come back again and do some closing remarks, and we'll be done and we'll run to grab some coffee or tea, depending on the time. But let me just quickly share this last Menti. Let me know when you see my screen. Anyone? Someone? Okay, I believe you can see my screen. So same Menti code that we used, but in case you had left the Menti code, oh, now we even have like a QR code on the screen. You can go to menti.com and use the code on the screen, 79108846. And the question is, what one thing can you do? What's the one thing you can do to advance women's empowerment after this webinar? Seeing some responses come in. What's the one thing? What one thing can you do to advance women's empowerment after this webinar? Intentional programming, maybe, as a researcher. Okay, so some of the responses include raising funds. Okay, the one thing you can do after the webinar is to share the recording of the webinar. Yeah, for sure. We can do that. That I can do. I'll share the recording of the webinar with all the participants, and you can share that with your colleagues who can benefit. Of course, someone says be intentional from the beginning. Okay, else, why don't you respond to some of this as you give us the closing remarks? Over.
Okay. Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to thank all of you who played a part in the LVIF CultiAF projects, the project assessment studies, the meta-analysis, this webinar, be it as an implementer, a project participant, a researcher, an enumerator, a donor, or a communicator. So thank you. Second, I think what I sort of take away is that gender equality, women's empowerment, it's not only a right, it's a critical, necessary condition for other development outcomes, like climate resilience in agri-food systems. And I think we all sort of resonate around that we still need to expand that evidence base, what works to support women's empowerment in agri-food systems, how does it work, what are the mechanisms, the mediating factors, what are the conditions for it to work, how does it resonate with local understanding and local aspirations in terms of women's empowerment, and also understand what does not work. I think what I also see is a commitment of different players in this field, and that is also necessary for this. And then that's translated into ensuring the necessary human resources, gender researchers, technical people who can also talk to each other, well-trained people, financial resources, and also like a way to be able to be adaptive and flexible throughout your projects. I think with that, I will stop it here, and I will thank you very much for being here, and I hope you learned as much as I did from this webinar. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
you.
Remember,
Bye-bye.
you can also join.
Bye.
Can also join the community of practice on the screen. Late mention, but yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. Very interesting. Looking forward to continue discussion.
Thank you.